Yes, so I'd like to welcome Patrick Rondeau. We're very pleased to have you here today. I'm going to pass over to Millie. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful land acknowledgement, Lynn. And first of all, bienvenue à Patrick. Nous vous remercions beaucoup pour nous rejoindre aujourd'hui. Nous savons que vous êtes très occupé et nous apprécions votre temps. Nous espérons utiliser votre connaissance pour mieux faire notre travail ici à l'Ontario. I would like to share with everyone Patrick's bio, which is incredibly impressive. Patrick joins us today as Union Director of the Environment and Just Transition Department of the Quebec Federation of Workers. He was, which is known as the FTQ. He was FTQ Regional Advisor for the Greater Metropolitan Region from 2012 to 2019. He was also responsible for mobilization and coordinated several national campaigns at the FTQ, including fighting for a minimum wage of $15. He was a member of the coordination committee of the Common Front for the Energy Transition from 2016 to 2021. He has been a member of the Circular Economy Cluster since 2019. In 2018, he coordinated the Summit for a Just Energy Transition at the Palais des Congrès in Montreal. He was a member of the Working Group on Electrification for the development of the Electrification and Climate Change Plan of the Government of Quebec, and is currently a member of the Canadian Sustainable Development Advisory Council, as well as expert on the advisory committee of the Centre of Expertise in Green Transition. Since 2024, this year, he is also a member of the Board of Directors of the Climate Action Network Canada. He has coordinated various delegations from the FTQ and the FTQ Solidarity Fund to the UN conference at CHICOP since 2015. Patrick also represents the Union Constitution at various forums and expert groups of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and in relation to the just transition. He is now the co-focal point of the trade unions NGOs at UNFCCC. He has also participated in various expert groups and given conferences on the just transition in Quebec since 2016. And that is certainly a province that we look to with a lot of admiration. Patrick has been campaigning and working in the union movement since 2000. So as you can see, we are incredibly fortunate and pleased to have Patrick with us. And I wanted to slip in just one other little tie-in to OCEC, which some of you may not be aware, that Patrick was involved with an environmental movement called Le Pacte in Quebec, which formed an inspiration during the founding of OCEC, particularly the idea of trying to build a progressive climate movement across party lines. And really, that is the victory that we need. And with that, I will turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you very much, Millie, and thank you, Lynn, for the invitation, and nice to see you all. I'm from Montreal, unceded territory of Tiohtià:ke, of the Great Nations, Kanien'kehá:ka. So thank you for the invitation. I'm pleased to talk to you about the environmental movement in Quebec from my point of view, of course, since it's my experience, especially since I come from a trade union and not an environmental group. And in fact, this peculiarity partly explains why the environmental movement is strong in Quebec. I don't have a PowerPoint since it's more of a story to tell than statistics to present to you this morning. First, because it is made of several organizations and goals, of course, but also unions, students, youth groups, citizens groups, and community organizations, but it doesn't stop there. As there's also a dialogue with scientists, health representatives, but also actors from the economic sector. So that's the ecosystem around the environmental movement in Quebec. In fact, this culture of mobilization has existed for a long time in Quebec. I believe that the particularity of the struggle for Quebec identity and the preservation of the French language also something to do with it. So we're no strangers to working collaboratively between ourselves. The social struggles in Quebec have all been won in collaborations, whether it's for free schooling, women's rights to vote, health insurance, or others. We also have multiple multi-stakeholders consultations forums, such as the Labor Partnership Commission, for example. So social dialogue is therefore a well-established culture that we have in Quebec. The environmental movement was built on these foundations, but with as you know, with a sense and a state of urgency at the same time, which at some point upsets the dynamics. First, until around, I would say 2015 to 2016, between the well-established situation of environmental groups and the democratization of this movement, it did not happen easily. I have to be quite honest about that. In addition, following the historic student strike of 2012 in Quebec, the advent of citizen groups has disrupted organizational relations. For the Quebec Federation of Labor, it's been a very difficult road. First, we had to identify the barriers for labor organization to join the fight against climate change, and the first was our own members. Since 2014, we have undertaken major projects to raise awareness of climate change and built our work around the principles of just transition, to reach out to them, to include them in this fight. And this was necessary if we wanted to open a dialogue with environmental groups, which was often seen by our members as adversary, to the jobs in this very poor situation where we have to choose between environment and jobs and not build a bridge, between those two. So this allows us to open a dialogue, first of all, with Greenpeace from 2014 to 2016, which allowed us to move from a stage of knowledge to allies. That still happens to this day, until today. Meanwhile, the environmental movement had begun to organize itself differently and came together under one banner, which is the Common Front for Energy Transition, who represent today nearly 100 organizations, from NGOs to labor, youth, and so on. But from then on, obstacles quickly appeared. How to integrate, for example, non-environmental groups such as trade unions, federation like the Quebec Federation of Labor, and above all, how to make progress without stepping on the toes of environmental groups has been working for decades on those issues. So was this very sensitive area of respect that we had to have, but at the same time to redesign the narrative and the story around the fight for climate change. All this while integrating citizens groups and, of course, the most radical organization or people in this movement. So it was not easy. What history teaches us is that mere opposition does not get us very far. From the moment that we impose the equation that each opposition must be offered proposals, the movement was transformed. It was very a key point in the environmental movement in Quebec. Climate issues have also become economic and then social issues. So it was not just about the environment, but how do we include economics preoccupation and social, and then to transform this climate fight change in a social justice fight as well. And as you know, it's quite a narrative today. Instead of splitting up, then we built on each other's expertise to build a new narrative that happened today. Despite all this, the Quebec government was not listening. Worse, when they were elected in 2019, there were almost no environmental policies at all on the table. Despite repeated calls, lobby, meetings, letters, we came to realize that we needed to mobilize more strongly. Two movements first initiated the mobilization in Quebec. First one was called La Planète s'invite au Parlement. a citizens group mostly, but above all, it was the student movement under the banner of Friday for the Future, which went on strike every Friday that lighted, this fuse about mobilization. Despite a sustained mobilization, the results remained the same, though. It was therefore through several cross discussions that the idea of mobilizing on September 27, 2019 was born. First, there was the student and citizen movement, but the international unions has also agreed to meet for Global Day of Global Strike on September 27. So the process was challenging, but it was based on an experience of dialogue and mobilization. First, the issues of dominations and power struggles has to be addressed within a very broad coalition, including environmental NGOs as well. It was the Quebec Federation of Labor that took over the coordination of this movement in 2019, drawing on its long experience of mobilization, in which case I myself found myself coordinating what was to become a historic day in the history of Quebec. We encountered several pitfalls. First, there was a movement of illegal strikes within the group led by citizens movement and opposition to the trade union movement, which was aware of the risk being too great because of the anti-strike legislation that we have in Quebec. These tensions persisted throughout and even weakened the movement thereafter, but I will get back to that later. In addition, there was the students who were struggling to keep up with the organization of the events, but were facing constraints regarding their study schedules. In the end, the clash of organizational cultures was very difficult, but it was amply addressed. First, we worked by creating autonomous working groups based on horizontality as much as possible. But the students still felt misunderstood, but didn't mention it. This has created frustration, unfortunately. Nevertheless, the broad coalition around the table, the consensual understanding of the issues, the respect of tactics, and constant dialogue allowed us to attract the attention of Greta Thunberg herself, who joined the march in Montreal on September 27. In 2019. So this march attracted 500,000 people, followed by actions across Quebec, which was a major win for us. Following this march, the Quebec government set up working groups to adopt its first environmental strategy a year later. Although it's widely insufficient, the tide began to turn. Then the movement picked up speed as it worked to prevent a major liquefied natural gas project in the Saguenay region. Then COVID happened. As you know, for all movements, it was quite hard to persist. This same movement has been reorganized around economic recovery then, as well as other provinces in Canada and the Climate Action Network did also. But the thing is that new players have emerged. Then, notably around a group now called the G15+, which brings together environmental groups, unions, but also the Quebec Employers Council and the social economy movement. So the movement changed during COVID, but built on the mobilization that we had before. So the strength of the movement in Quebec is that it is not monolithic. It's not under the same banner specifically. It's a lot of movements. Inside a movement, there are several groups that have links, at least at the level of communication, other than on strategies. In addition, an incredible amount of groundwork has been done, demonstrating that the citizens of groups at Quebec are ready to move forward, whether it's the Common Front Net Zero Roadmap, the G15 Plus Roadmap, the Broad Energy Coalition Manifesto, the Montreal Call on the underlying causes of the biodiversity crisis from COP15 in Montreal, or even, like you said earlier, the Pact. Which was a very driven process. The idea is to demonstrate that the movement are not only in oppositions, but have proposals which has been discussed at length and have been built on consensus. The movement today is going well, but has transformed and it's facing new challenges. While the movement has become more democratic, the tactic differs greatly, and the debates are currently at the level of the best strategies to use between the political lobby and actions of civil or direct disobedience. The radicalisms of certain citizens groups has also increased, and the equation between the opposition and the proposal has shifted. The opposition is taking up more space than the proposals boil down to defeating capitalism. So it's not balanced anymore on those very consensual propositions that we had. And it's largely, explained by the climate emergency that we are, the forest fires, the flood, the drought. So it can be explained, but there's a shift in the balance to build on proposition. As for the student movement, it has been almost non-existent, unfortunately, since COVID. They're rebuilding themselves right now. Nevertheless, this same organization, including all the actors named so far, including the municipalities now, which are great allies in this fight, have once again begun to discuss and plan a day of action on September 27, 5 years later, after the historic mobilization of Quebec, so this September. What we recall is that there are conditions that are essential. First, the meaning, which implies that the issues must be discussed and deepened, and that this consensus gives meaning to mobilization. Secondly, there's the motivation. So to make sure that we can change something and find a way between radicalisms and defeatisms, this, oh, what's the use anymore? That we hear more and more from the youth in Quebec, but not just the youth, from the workers, from the citizens, this kind of, defeatisms saying, we're done. So we have to find a way between and a path between those two. Third, there is identity. Who we are, who are we, what is our common denominator, and find it and build on it like we did with the Common Front, the G15, the Pact, and so on. So there was an identity behind all of those, iconography, key people, key organization, and so on. And finally, there's the notion of pleasure, which could be sound very strange, but we find out that friendship is absolutely necessary, and the respect between individuals as well. Otherwise, it just don't work. Another lesson that we learn is that we have to plan on long term, which we didn't do in 2019, and that was our biggest error that we had. It opened the door to underdog organizations, stating that those actions were useless, even days, less than a week after September 27. And that affected the whole mobilization for the months to come. The other thing is the possibility that we experience of hijacking and co-opting the whole movement by individuals who are only driven by their ego. It's very sad to say, but it exists, and we have to be aware of that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of them, but we can get around that. So it's about humility as a center at some point to do this work. Dialogue, therefore, is the key, and comprehend the different dynamics of our organizational cultures all the time. Also, we must never forget that the journey that we individually took is different from one another. And we cannot ask people to follow us directly on the level of our own journey. We must acknowledge them and be inclusive. And that's most probably the most important part when you're trying to find solution and gather people and so on. And lastly, we have a saying in French that very visualize all of that, which is tout seul on va plus vite, mais ensemble on va plus loin, which means alone we go faster, but together we go farther. I hope you find these tips useful for your conversation. I will be happy to answer any question if you have.
Thank you, Patrick. That was absolutely incredible and so much value there for us to learn from. Lynn, I don't know if you want to moderate questions, but if people want to, and I'm just going to put it back to the regular view so we can sort of see everybody. Okay, we see a hand up already. David, please go ahead with your question.
Patrick, so thank you so much for your frank account. I come out of SCFP in Toronto and know well the logo, the 301 and 429 in Montreal. We've worked closely together many years. I have two questions that are union and environmental related. I understand that the CSN was involved in the McMaster battery plant, calling for environmental assessment of that plant, and just wanted to know if there are unionized workers going to be in that plant, because again, if there would be a conflict between the environmental concerns and the workers in the plant. And the second question was, we're all very proud of Quebec Hydro being public. But my understand is Legault is thinking of privatizing Quebec Hydro, and that will have a great negative impact on environmental policy going forward and the success of our sustainability. So I'm sorry if I'm giving you two big, large questions, but I just would love to hear your comments. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
You're welcome. Yeah, about this battery, which called Northvolt, which is a battery plant that is going to establish itself in Quebec, and what we'd find out is that the actual government didn't go all through the environmental process to actually accept the project. Even passed by some very important test and a process that they should have been doing. And what's also very frustrating is that there was a project for housing in the same place a couple of months before, and this project didn't have a green light because of biodiversity issues. But then this big plant arrive, and then we go fast forward and go and push besides environmental evaluation and so on. So it is very, very frustrating, and there's a strong citizen movement against this plant. But here's the thing, is that the strong opposition is divided. There's this opposition about the consultation and the environmental evaluation that this company or this plant should have been through. And the Quebec Federation of Labor and its affiliates are with that, and CSN is at the same place. So I would say that the trade union movement about those evaluation are on the same page. But then you have citizens groups also against the project itself, being against, as a matter of fact, against all industrial projects and asking for the growth of the economy and that we shouldn't have any new industries in Quebec. So this issue is much more difficult for the trade unions movement, as you know, because we represent those workers. We're working on just transition. We want those workers to do a better job, keeping their job, but decarbonate the industry, the economy, and so on. But shutting down plants will just affect the communities as well, and because we have this mono-economic situation in Quebec, and I'm sure in Ontario as well, when you shut down a plant or a manufacturer, or it's the whole town that is closing down, so here's the situation that we have right now. So on the evaluation and so on, you're quite right. On the other, and that's what I was talking about earlier, is about this, we're opposing, but we're not proposing anything. It's just opposing. And then it divides people. It divides organizations. So we're trying to find a path all the time to gather people So yeah, this battery plant is a big fight right now for democracy about evaluation, and not just being driven by economic growth, by establishing companies and plants and industries in Quebec. So that's the first thing. The other thing is a very big fight. You're quite right about the denationalization. I don't know if I can say that in English, but of this crown state that we have, which is Hydro-Québec. Which is a big pride of Quebec citizens, but at the same time, a necessity. We have one of the greener energy production, distribution in the world, and it's all public, under public, governance. And then you have this government who wants to weaken, as a matter of fact, this monopoly that they had, and that raised the question of to do what with that. And the thing is that, and you getting back to this example of Nordvolt and other industries, is that this government is only driven by economic growth and want to have very big industries and plants established in Quebec. In an economic, also only preoccupations, and then we will need to produce more electricity to accommodate those new industries. And we can ask ourselves, the production of electricity should be about decarbonization or economic growth? And that's the question that we have right now. And the new electricity that's going to be produced, or energy, all those renewable energy, windmill, geothermal, solar, everything is being considered only under the private sector, which is a very big issue that we have. And if you look in Europe, specifically in France, they had the same situation, even with nuclear. So you then have an attack, directly against Hydro-Québec, since it's going to lose there's a monopoly, and then it's going to be the prices and the demand and so on. So yeah, it's a big fight that we will have to face, but the good thing, the good news is that it's mobilizing a lot of people, on the same page against this modification of the law. So you can see citizens, youths, trade union, we're all on the same page on this. So we're ready to bring this fight to the Quebec government. As a matter of fact, we have a very big colloque next week around this question, bring around 300 people from very different horizons in the same room and build the opposition to this situation. But it will not, settle the thing about new renewable energies under the private sector. So that's the big question that we'll have to face next.
Thank you, Patrick, for such a full answer. That's really appreciated. Bob.
Thank you, Patrick. I think I agree with what you were saying about the need to focus on a just transition and finding solutions to sustainable decarbonized industry, and also dealing with privatization. There's two questions I have. Because of your experience, do you have suggestions for how we in Ontario might work together with you and the people that you represent? And I think particularly in terms of all of us wanting to engage labor and to have the dialogues that we need to have at this point in time. Many of us come from a union background, and we're also environmentalists. The other question, of course, particularly for us, is the proliferation of methane or natural gas and the nuclear issue, and how we go about resolving those differences with labor, particularly. That's very much connected to the first question I asked. I hope those are clear. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, maybe you could reach out to the Common Front on the Energy Transition as OCEC. Maybe it could be a good start. I can provide a contact to Lynn after this meeting. Of course, there's going to be the language barrier, though, that that's the Canadian reality that we have, but we can pass that, I think. So, but maybe to build, on capacity building, the Common Front could be a good start on how they built this very strong movement, which was at the beginning about opposing to pipelines, to create a roadmap, a map on decarbonization in Quebec around 100 organization. So it was a 2-year process. Everybody, and it's not as much as the results of this map, but as the process of having all those organizations around tables on specific issues and learning from each other. I think that was the strongest point that we had, and this way that we built proposition by consensus in Quebec. So I think that's the first thing. For example, in capacity building, the thing about the labor movement in Canada, I know full well the Canadian Labor Congress, since we're affiliated to them, but it's much more on a Canadian level. I must be honest that I lost track of the Ontario Federation of Labor, but could be, I think, maybe somewhere to go. But at the same time, you always had the Toronto and New York Labor Council, which has been very a grassroots organization that might be a good place to go again, maybe meet new people there, because the leadership change and the staff change a little bit. So I think those are very interesting entry point to get in touch with. In Ontario. Otherwise, yeah, we'll be happy to keep contact with the OCEC. There's no problem there. But I think that's the way to engage with labor. On specific issues like the nuclear, it's a very difficult one, because as you know, I participate in the UNFCCC COPs since 2015. And we always used to hear about nuclear as a renewable solution, and it's a renewable energy or not, and so on. But never, very seriously throughout the years. But last year, when the parties did agree to move out of fossil fuels, even though it's very slowly and very, phasing out, blah blah blah, blah blah, but moving away. That's the term. Moving away from fossil fuels with no timeline whatsoever. But at the same time, you have this indication that at some point people are going to move away from fossil fuels, and you have this pledge about tripling energy efficiency, renewable energy, and doubling energy efficiency. Then nuclear came back up front, and the discussions that the parties that have at COP on nuclear was not about should we go on nuclear or not. It is a solution, and we will produce nuclear. So it's in the energy mix. For the parties, the states, there's no doubt about that. They're going to develop the nuclear energy as a solution on coal, oil, and gas. That's quite clear. So, we used to have this discussion about maybe someday, but it's kind of happened like, or maybe as, okay, here we go. So it happened very fast, and Canada will go this way also. I can assure you, they did have those discussions at COP. They will go on nuclear and small modules and so on. So, and if you follow the nuclear, because you have a strong movements against the nuclear in Canada, all the latest consultation has been awful. It's been a total nightmare. It's very opaque. We don't have any information specifically on 2 items. 2 issues within the nuclear is about waste management and transportation of waste management and security, therefore. we don't have any clear information on that. And the other thing is that the federal government want to finance and subsidize the nuclear industries, but we don't know how, on which level, and so on. So I think those two issues, at least, we should work on them, and trying to find answers before just going to workers working on those fields saying we want it to be shut down, because you will face resistance and blocking. That's for sure. But if you build around security and finance and engage in a dialogue with them and build around the just transition principles, which are very difficult since the Quebec, not the Quebec, but the federal government did a tremendous job of screwing this concept, meaning that they put in the head of workers that it was toxic, it was about job losses, when it's not. It's about preserving jobs and the amelioration of working conditions and a lot of equity issues at the same time. But at least you have the sustainable job bill that you can build on to have this discussion. But it's going to be a very difficult discussion. Mostly it's Unifor, which are in the nuclear in Canada. In Quebec, it's QP from the union from David, but it's quite. But we don't have nuclear anymore anyway in Quebec. But the plant is decommissioned, but not closed yet. So it could be reopened again. But it's going to be a very, very difficult fight. But I would say engage, dialogue, find ways, build on proposition, not just opposition, and try to move on from there.
I wonder, David, if we, or Patrick, if we could work specifically together on the issue of the regulatory agency caving to the nuclear industry on the dump on the Ottawa River, which will have as big an impact on Quebec as it does on Ontario.
Yeah, and we do have a working group in Quebec, not in Quebec. We have a working group in the Quebec Federation of Labor around this issue, and Outaouais Labor Council is part of that, because you're absolutely right. That's a big issue for the area of Gatineau and Ottawa. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, you could work with them very easily.
Thank you. I just want to draw attention to one of the questions that was put in the chat. Laura McGrath from Shift Action says, we are really interested in the Northvolt issue at Shift, and we've been tracking it. 4 Canadian pension funds have contributed financing to the project as part of their attempts to move money into climate solutions. So if you want to comment at all on pension funds for climate solutions or that specific situation, please go ahead.
Oh yeah, that's another big part of the discussion. That is why in Quebec, the journey that we took as the Quebec Federation of Labor, not the environmental movement, but as the Quebec Federation of Labor, first of all, we met our own members of those issues because they weren't there, like I said. And if we wanted to engage with environmental group, we would have had a strong setback from them, said, what are you doing talking with those who want to make us lose our jobs, So it was the first part, that we had discussion with our own members and then the environmental NGOs and so on. But the third thing that we find out is that as long as we don't engage finance in this discussion, we're not going anywhere, with the Quebec government. And we had a chance in Quebec, as you know, to have a workers' fund, pension fund, which is the Fonds Solidarité FTQ, the Solidarity Fund of the FTQ, which is a workers' fund, which is a very autonomous organization, very separated from FTQ, but at the same time, it's a workers' fund where we have people on the board. So yeah, finance is a very key issue. There's a lot of organization working around that, about sustainable finance, ESG indicators, and so on. But and you have Shift, of course. You have EY. You have a lot of organization working on that, and it has to be included in the work and the narrative. Otherwise, you're just you're missing a big part of it, you know, because you're right, those pension funds are financing a lot of troubles that we were fighting against. And sometimes we are in those pension funds. So we are part of the problem without knowing it. So organizing, you know, around pension funds, organizing around shareholder activisms is very important at the same time. And that's something that we're trying to do at the Quebec Federation of Labor, even though we have the Workers' Fund, but it's very hard. It's very hard to bring people to understand that their pension fund is a way to a vehicle that they can use, but at the same time, how to navigate in and how can I propose a resolution in my assembly and so on. But you have to do it. Absolutely, you have to do it, and keeping track of it, and moving on solution proposition, on transparency of the big, you know, financial institutions, have indicators, have tools, and so on. Yeah, that's a field that you have to invest as well if you want to. That's part of the solution, of course, absolutely.
Thank you. We do have some more questions in the chat, and I also see Gail's hand. So I'm going to say that for the next, 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to take kind of general questions, whatever questions you have. And then by the time we get to 12, we'd like to shift into the real focus on OCEC questions, our strategy questions for how we move forward. So here's a general question that I think you've started to address, Patrick, but if you have any additional comments, can we address climate issues separately from economic or social justice? I think what you've been saying is it has to be integrated with the finance, has to be integrated with the climate issues. But if you want to say a little bit more about that, because the question here says, I'm afraid we lose some public support for climate action by combining the agendas, like the just transition, labor questions with climate. How can we get the public in it when we combine those? That's the question, I think.
Yeah, you cannot divide, the files, because all those are integrated anyway, because the climate change is caused by human activity, which is caused by economic and specifically economic growth, for example. So everything is in everything. So if you try to compartment, all those things, you're missing some key elements. Now, does it mean that every organization must be champion on economy, finance, climate change, labor? The answer is no. But I think it's the collaboration between those actors that pay the most. So for example, the first discussion that we had with Greenpeace at the Quebec Federation of Labor, it was about, they were talking about climate justice, and we were talking about social justice, and it was not the same thing at all. But what we find out is that they had a whole lot more expertise on us on climate change, and we did have a whole much more experience on the economy and social justice than they had. So we built together on what we had, and we didn't try to take the place of the others and integrate everything at the same point. But when you do that, you integrate some key elements that you bring to your own narrative to build it. Because the only thing that you have to keep in mind is, what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to change? How do you want to change that? And with who? For who? And then when you stay in your own cluster, you only, unfortunately, influence the people around you. So you cannot you cannot break this echo chamber that you're in. And if you cannot break this echo chamber, it's like I said, you're going very fast, maybe on some issues, but not farther. And we need to go farther and build power balance to change the politics around climate change. So unfortunately, I think you have to bring everything, but not necessarily by changing who you are or your organization, but maybe be part of something bigger at the same time and bring at your table your own story, your own expertise, your own part of this very big symphony that you have to play.
Thank you. I love that image of building a symphony. And certainly as OCEC, we have 280, at least 280 members who've signed on to our 12-point climate plan, which we integrate a whole number of points in there. But actually moving that agenda forward is, and getting it more publicly adopted is a challenge. So we are going to want to ask you to talk about the pact specifically because we are wondering about that as a tool. But before we move into that, I'm just going to take, I think there's 2 more questions, just brief. Gail Greer asks, are you taking any position on the Climate Aligned Finance Act in the Senate? And then Gail Fairley, if you would like to speak after that. I don't see your hand anymore, but you had it up before. So anyways, do you want to answer that question from Gail Greer, the Climate Aligned Finance Act?
I'm not very used to this Climate Aligned Finance Act in the Senate, unfortunately. So it's a very short answer, but no,
Okay.
we're not.
That's
We don't
fine.
have a position yet on this.
That's fine. Okay, Gail Fairley, did you have a question? Your hand was up before. I don't see it now. And if not, you know what? I'm going to hand it over to Millie.
I just getting back. It's the Rosa Galvez.
Yeah.
Is that? Oh yeah. Okay. I was mistaken. Yeah, we supported that. Rosa came to us very early in the process saying, can the labor movement yeah, we totally supported that and trying our best to support her. We had a very good discussion with her in the last COP around that because it's still alive, but it's a very difficult act to bring. But all Senate, act are very difficult because they cannot talk about economy when they propose an act from the Senate. So I think she's trying to find support maybe with opposition. So I would say that what we didn't do though is to have engaged in discussion with opposition in Ottawa. Maybe it could be a very good start to build on that. But yeah, we totally support our initiative.
Thank you. That's another strategy question we could look at. But right now, I think I'm going to hand it over to Millie. And Millie, you could include Liz's question about the pact in taking it more to the direction of OCC strategy, particularly. Okay, over to you.
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Patrick, for an incredible discussion so far. So yes, what we'll do at this point is, of course, continue the line of questions, but try to connect even more directly with the work that we're trying to do through OCEC and learn from your Quebec experience in that regard. So I think a wonderful segue to this section is with Liz's question. She's posted in the chat. Could you please describe how Le Pacte worked, and do you think it resulted in significant changes in public perceptions of the climate emergency?
Yeah, I think so, but on an individual level only, because Le Pacte was you had to sign it as an individual, and it was the way it was built around. It was much more a manifesto, if you want, to raise awareness about climate change. So that worked very well. But it was very much around Dominique Champagne, which is a theater director in Quebec, very famous director. But and he mostly gathered personalities, cultural personalities around these very specific topics to raise awareness of the citizens, which is the public. So it worked very well for a year. But what was lacking in the pact was the actual proposition, because they did meet with the government at some point, because the pact has a very big success, and even the environmental ministry and the prime minister asked to meet Dominique Champagne on this pact, and they had a lot of discussion. But the thing is it's that it was a manifesto, and not with very shovel-ready proposition, if you want, which was what the government was looking for. So I think that's maybe the weakness of the pact, but the strength of the pact was that it reached its target of raising awareness for people. Absolutely. And it helped a lot in the mobilization that we had in 2019, because of course there was headlines like Greta Thunberg was with us, but all the work that Dominique did with the pact before that brought a lot of citizens, in this fight against climate change, and he brought something very important, which was a missing link in the fight against climate change, which was the culture actors, and that's when you're trying to think about what is the ecosystem of the mobilization for climate change, even though everybody's doing his part in this symphony, we do play very different instruments. And the more that you have, the more, grandiose will be your symphony, because in this ecosystem, Quebec, like I said, you have the environmental NGOs, the citizens, organizations, and the youths, the students, of course, the trade unions, but you have human rights activists as well. You have the health sector, you have the economic sector now, but you have scientific, you have the cultures, and you do need the indigenous. You do need all of those people on board to build around that. So the pact was a good thing, but they didn't plan any follow-up after that. And I would say if you're building on the pact, it's a very good thing. But do gather and reach out to other, communities, which is the key thing. But built around what are we going to do after that? Because that was the weakness of the pact. How many people signed the pact? I can't remember. A lot. Thousands, but I don't have the number in mind. And the essence, it was very much about, it was very literal, not literal, how do we say, literal, if you want. It was about not the mind, but the heart, mostly. It could be I think, you're right. It's 250,000 that signed it. But it was about reaching out the heart of people and not the head of people, which was the big difference that they had. The pact is not alive anymore in Quebec. It closed at some point. But what you could find, which is the more the nearer of the pact right now, is a movement which called Mères au Front, so mothers at the front, which is a movement built around mothers and grandmothers mobilizing for their children and grandchildren. And the manifesto that they had, they call a cry for, I don't know, I forgot, but it's again about reaching out the heart of people instead of their minds. So I think you have to have proposition, but you have also to have this reach out, this call of a hope, as a matter of fact, because it's a call for hope that they had to defeat this very dark situation that we are in. So it's a very big part of the movement.
Hi, Patrick, there was just a question about what really was the essence of Le Pacte. And the way I understood it is that there was a personal pledge. So I would sign a personal pledge that would say I would try to reduce my emissions in these different ways. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't, going to limit me, but to the best of my ability, I will, reduce my emissions in these ways. And at the same time, I expect of government, and there were at least five or six, I think, specific asks of government to do. That's the way I remember the form of it. So what I felt like the genius of it was it engaged the personal, as you've said, heart, the personal kind of commitment of the 250,000 people or so who signed it, together with the political pressure of these asks. And I'm not sure, you're kind of suggesting that the asks weren't as specific as I thought they were. I thought they were specific asks. But we could certainly construct something that has specific asks. But it's the combination of the effect and also how it worked during the election. So maybe comment on that. And Ray has asked what was the process for creating it and developing the wording.
I'm not aware of the process because I wasn't part of the process of the PAC. It was Dominique Champagne, like I said, but I know that he gathered a lot of personalities, well-known personalities in Quebec. They organized a big rally in a theater in Montreal, and to launch the PAC, and it was very, striking because when you looked at that, looking at the news, you recognize so much people that you know in the same room saying, oh, okay, we have to do more for climate change and we have to engage. That was the message, and that worked very well, and at the same time, what I was saying is that the weakness of the PAC is that there was proposition, but very overall proposition, but it reached out to people, 250,000 people, that's a lot. But the attraction that they gain, like I said, attracted even the Prime Minister of Quebec. But when they met him, that's where the weakness was, because there was no chivalry. It wasn't about the other, area, economic, workforce, if you want, community development, and so on. There was nothing about that. So it was like, oh, you did a great job, thank you, but but we were able to build on that. So I'm not saying that you should have very specific, propositions, because you're going to lose people with that. But what the pact missed, I think, is a second phase, because I think to gather those people with their heart is a very big win, but then you have to be able to build on something else after that. The same that we did with the 2019 mobilization that we had in Quebec. We didn't prepare for, because we weren't aware that we will have more than 500,000 people in the streets in Montreal. If we knew that, we would have, immediately built something as a follow-up. So that's the thing. I think you can build something very simple to reach out to people, but already prepare for what's next. And then in your what's next, and keep on building on that, because otherwise you have to begin again from scratch everything, and that's a big problem.
So what you're saying is it could be useful to build a certain body of contacts and committed people, but then you need a second phase to kind of direct that that energy to specific asks. So you have to get ready for the second phase following the outreach. There's some questions about outreach there, but I'm not sure. It might be more of the people who were directly involved in LePact who we wondered whether they did something like climate conversations, which is an area that some of our organizations have worked on in OCEC, that is inviting people who aren't already in the climate movement to come to a smaller group discussion hosted by someone they know from their work, from their home, from their church group, and then use that as a way to reach out to get new people involved. Or it sounds like it was definitely on the news and on in the cultural sector that there was outreach done about LePact. So just if you do have other knowledge of how that was built, maybe you could just add a little bit more to it. Because the question is always, how do we get people interested in signing and getting involved? And then Gail will be next with her question.
Yeah, I think the key point was that it was supported by cultural personalities in Quebec, so it gathers attention from the start. And then it was not only organized around those people. It was the starting point, if you want. And then I do remember that people fill a very short form online, to be part of the pack. It was very simple. So it was a form online. And they could also, I remember those very small postcards, which was red and white, that people could sign and fill online after that. So it was mostly around that. It was very grassroots, as a matter of fact, the way that the pact has been signed. But the key is that even though it was supported only by the culture sector at the beginning, the next step for the pact was to gather every communities, environmental NGOs, citizens, trade unions, and so on, with one after the other, bring postcards saying, can you make your own members sign that? And we all agree on that. So that's how it worked after that, because there was already a very strong network of organization working on climate issues then. So the pact didn't build that. It was already there, but we work together on that. But it was quite simple, it was postcard, online form to fill, and that's about it. And then every time that some actors, comedians, director had a chance to talk in public, they did talk of the pack. So it was already kind of latent, present in the medias, even though it was not directly like, for example, all those gala that we have for cinema, theater, and so on, when an actor won a prize, not a prize, but a statue, if you want, they did mention the pact in their speech. So it was organized also that way. So to keep it alive, but yeah.
Thank you. Gail Fairley, and then over to Millie after that.
Okay, I have a completely different question. I'm wondering whether or not there's any appetite or value in starting to talk about post-growth, which is really about decreasing productions of things that you don't need or are detrimental to the environment or people, and increasing those that are good for people. And I'm just thinking about, you're talking about North Volt. And so we do need probably factories like that for batteries, but we want them in a place that is not going to be environmentally destructive. And we don't want to really have that production purely, and it seems, well, not purely, but a lot of these companies are really looking at exporting and making a lot of money with exporting of products rather than looking at what we need within our own country for the green transition.
Yeah, we do have an appetite for that. As a matter of fact, we have our convention last year, January from last year, and there was a resolution about exploring the growth as the Quebec Federation of Labor. So we're working on that. We put on a working group to explore the growth. But it's a very, very difficult discussion that we have in the labor movement. We're beginning to have literature review on that. We find out that in Europe, there's a lot of talk about trade unions and degrowth, which is quite interesting. And we can talk about past growth, as you said, but other paradigm of other economic paradigm like circular economy, but in a way to degrowth and so on, a social economy and so on. So yeah, we actually have those discussions right now. We're beginning to have those discussions, but like I said, it's very a difficult one. And it's all in the way to bring it to people, to engage with them, because if you do engage with them and they get immediately the sentiment that they're going to lose something, they shut down and you're not going anywhere. So I would say it's not that much about having information or on the growth or post growth that we already have, and we'll agree that that's the problem. It's much more now on a communication level and how to engage those discussion with people who don't have those discussion at all or even think about that. But yeah, we have a very strong appetite around that because that's an issue. That's real.
Millie.
Sure,
Jump-
thank you, thank you. And I will just jump in with a question that I have for Patrick, but I also just wanted to remind people in this last half hour, we'd really like to focus our questions on things that relate directly to OCEC strategy, so we can really benefit from Patrick's time spent with us. So in that vein, Patrick, the question I had for you was, at OCEC, we engage both with public as voters and with elected officials as an environmental democracy movement. In your presentation that you described, there seemed to be more direct engagement with the public in order to influence government rather than an emphasis on direct government lobbying. So with our limited capacity, do you feel that engaging the public is more effective than direct government engagement if our goal is to influence government policy?
It's very difficult because you have to do both, and it's all about power balance. Because at the end of the day, if you want government to move, they're going to see if their electors are going to follow them, and if, like, for example, the situation that we had in Quebec before the September 27, there was no environmental plan on the table, nothing at all, the government Legault was just not concerned about that. But bring 500,000 people, voters, in the street. That's how you have to see that. It changed a lot, because then the environmental minister could get back to the prime minister saying, oh, hey, we have to acknowledge that, and it opened something. So it's not so much as people, citizens, than voters. It's quite, unfortunately, it resumes to that, because they're going to listen to voters at the end of the day. And it's not as much as the whole government sometimes than just in the, how do you say that, les comtés électoraux in English? Rating, where you have deputies.
The ridings, yes.
The ridings, yes, yeah, deputies that you can reach out, because at some point they will have to have discussion in the caucus that they have. So there's this political strategy that you can have, which can be very low level with citizens and voters and organization and so on. That's the way that we're working with the Quebec Federation of Labor to lobby. It's not just having our president meeting with the prime minister, which is okay, but don't show that much results. But it's a very grassroots process that we have, and to do so, you have to build this balance of power, and you have to reach out to people. And the best way to reach out to people is throughout maybe some organization that have actual captive members, if you want, and that they can reach very quickly. So, and build it. It's like, Legos and building them all together. So, but you have to do both, absolutely. Otherwise, you're just building a movement that has no results, and it's very demobilizing. And if you only go through the political process, they're going to look above your shoulders saying, oh, is there someone else following her or him? And if not, you can talk all you want, you won't go anywhere.
Sounds good. That helps to reaffirm the approach we've been trying to take, but it's good to hear that from you. Okay, let's take Nikki's question next, and then Gail has one in the chat that we'll do after Nikki's.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Patrick. I really appreciate your really frank evaluation of the various programs that have gone well and maybe some of the shortfalls of some of the things that have happened in Quebec. I think we can learn a lot from that. One of the things I was really struck by was your conversation about hype or momentum of some of these programs, and then perhaps reaching a bit of a dead end when there was no continuation and follow up to these initiatives. And I can't help but see the correlation here in Ottawa and in Ontario, as we have these targeted programs, and then they may reach failure, which is good in some ways because you have to continue to fight, but it's when they are partially successful. And then the question is, what is the next thing to tackle? How do you mobilize towards the next thing that is, and how do you keep these small incremental wins going? And so my question to you is the branding almost of La Pacte. How could that have been used to address other things after its hype was sort of had decayed a little bit, perhaps?
Yeah, I think you have to separate constant mobilization than constant planning, which are two different things, because you cannot mobilize people all the time. It's just impossible. You have to mobilize them about the means, the motivation, the identification, and there's key elements, and on certain occasion and momentum. But if you want to build a movement, mobilize people and keep them mobilized all the time, it will fail, because at some time there's this fatigue that's happening, and it's quite demobilizing. But what you have to do though is to plan, so what's my first step, and what's going to be the next step, and what's going to be the next step, and to have small wins, and that's the situation that we have right now, is that you have the Common Front on Energy Transition that have a roadmap on decarbonization. You have the G15 plus group was also a roadmap on economic recovery and so on, and sustainable development and other issues. And so it's those plans that are more important, as a matter of fact, than mobilizing people all the time. And then you create momentum, and then you mobilize key people around that, and so on. It's a wheel turning, turning on. So I think that's the difference between those two. And the thing is with Le Pacte is that it was around a few people that brought a big mobilization around a lot of people, but stayed a few people. And even though the pact closed in some kind of way, it didn't, because a lot of other initiatives picked up from Le Pacte, like the Common Front, like the G15, like the Energy Manifesto that we have right now with the coalition around energy, and as a matter of fact, Hydro-Québec, like we talked earlier, and you have a lot of initiative. But the thing is, I think what we're trying to do right now, and it's working quite well, is to create a kind of consultation around all of those movements, that they talk to each other. That's what's more important, and everybody's playing their parts without being co-opted by the others, but by being aware of what the others are doing and building big blocks on blocks and so on, because we have actual plan that we can build on and move forward. Yeah, that's what I would say. So we have to separate mobilization and planning.
Great. Okay. And Lynn, I see your hand up. Should we take Gail's question first and then move on to you? Okay. Gail posted in the chat, in the debate over public versus private organization of production and distribution and their relation to economic growth and greater equality, is the concept of creating local communal commons being discussed, things like local distributed energy systems, land trusts for housing, etc.
It's a very difficult discussion in Quebec since we all are under Hydro-Québec, which is a crown state organization. So what we want mostly is that all renewable energy stays under Hydro-Québec, because it's already built that way. It's public. So that's the first thing. But what we're working on for a couple of years now and have absolutely no listening from the government on this is that we have to build a consultation table in each area or community or region in Quebec based on the need of the communities to develop the socio-economic actions then, and not just on economic growth for all of Quebec. So yeah, we do have those discussions about organizing tables on socio-economic development, which include energy at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you. And on to Lynn, then I'll pass it over.
Thank you. I just wanted to check in with you, Patrick, about other strategies, because we've asked you a number of questions about LEPAC and certain other kind of organizing. But I'm understanding that building the environmental movement in Quebec, fighting Energy East, fighting fracking, all these fights included things like long walks, weeks of people walking around the gas bay or around and talking to the local communities in all those areas. And also the other strategy that I found interesting to learn about was engaging municipal politicians. So the threat to water quality from a spill from the pipeline brought about resistance from municipal water bodies, water corporations and so forth. And so it's just the kind of, maybe if you want to comment on those strategies or anything else unique. Like I really liked your point you just raised about the regional. I have heard about that too, the kind of regional tables, which I think might be something for us to think about here in OCEC. But those other things like the long walk and engaging municipal politicians, whatever your thoughts on that are.
Maybe the key people, that you can work with, but I would say I think I covered a lot, but maybe what I didn't talk a lot is about municipalities right now. Those municipalities are struggling to face adaptation on climate change and don't have any money from the governments whatsoever. And those are very big, very good allies that we can work with. Because once again, it's about citizens and voters and municipal administration. And either you're talking about transportation, you're talking about adaptation, you're talking about mitigation on the industrial level on their specific area, they are under fire right now. And I think to open this dialogue with the municipalities is a very, very good a good card to play right now. So otherwise, I think I mentioned mostly everything, to have different communities. Communities meaning trade unions, environmental NGOs, culture, and so on, to talk together, to at least have an antenna in each of those very specific communities of actions. And then, yeah, you have to work on both public awareness and governments. But maybe the other thing I will say is about the communication. And what we find out also is that you have to keep in mind when you're using communication as a strategy to very evaluate who are you addressing to, and that's a big fail that we have in the left movement, if you want, the left-wing movement, is that we're trying to reason with politicians, professionals, journalists, and so on, and we're not talking to the actual public, which the red wing movement do very well. They're not addressing to the government, you know, they're addressing to the people, and we have to address the people all the same. So on the communication level, we have to very identify clearly which is the target and what's the message that's going to come through to them. That's maybe another thing you can check. There's another thing that has been created in Quebec, which call the climate change community of practitioners. And I think there's something similar, I think, outside of Quebec on a federal level, but I will have to check that. But it gathers, you know, professionals working in our organization on how they communicate on climate and how to build message, how to reach out to people. So I think that's a big part that you have to explore as well, is about communication.
Thank you. Oops, yes, thank you very much, Patrick. I think the Quebec mobilizing is a real inspiration to us, and it's really great for us to have more of a window into how you're going about it, and not just the successes that you've had, but the challenges and obstacles that are there. So what we need to pay attention to in building it over different stages and engaging widely, and that the government cares about who you represent, who's actually behind you, where the voters, because that's going to influence them. I think it's really great to hear this from you, and we have, I'm sure, still many questions, but we wanted to thank you and give you a chance to go. We'll just check in briefly so other people know on a couple of the upcoming things, because we are working with municipalities right now on fighting the government over their decision to overturn the OEB decision recently made. I don't know if you know about that. You know about the OEB, decision, which was to delink Enbridge from that 40-year financing that they're used to, and they're not happy about that. So the government is planning to overturn that. But there is a process. There will be hearings on that bill, and we're organizing with municipalities on that. So we'll stay a few minutes on other people, and we can check in on some of the sign-on letters and things like that we have been sending out to folks, and plan our next meeting date, etc. But right now, I just will invite everybody. Maybe we can just unmute. People can say their thank you, and maybe we can just take a picture of everybody as well before you sign off, Patrick, and other people can stay on, as I say, for a few minutes. Okay, if you want to be in a photo, please show your lovely faces. And here we go. I'm seeing lots of faces coming. That's great. And there's some wonderful tributes in the chat to you, Patrick. Some thank yous are in that chat there. Okay, I see some applause signs coming across. Lower my hand. Okay, I am going to take a picture now. Here we go. Thank you. Thank you very much, folks. So thank you, Patrick, for joining us.